can we back up a little bit and talk about, maybe for audience who may be naive to like what exactly catheters that we're talking about? Like, what is pressure-directed embolotherapy, or sometimes you hear it called, pressure-enabled drug delivery?
Yeah. So the concept, increasing the pressure or changing the pressure, modifying the pressure, we think about it as a novel concept. It's actually not that novel at all. The first papers were coming out of Japan in 1991, where they were looking at it particularly for TACE in areas where you were also potentially perfusing the stomach. And so they used it to kind of protect the anti-reflux properties from the stomach. And there was a great paper out of Japan in the English literature, because I always joke I don't know how to read Japanese nor speak Japanese. But at least the first English one was in 1991. And then it was kind of lost to follow-up, I guess, for the next 10 years. And eventually, in the early 2000s, there was a resurgence, because not only were they starting to realize that you had the anti-reflux properties, but they were starting to see better lipidal deposition into tumors. And so in Japan, around the mid-2000s to the early 2010s, there was a huge resurgence in conventional TACE, Irie et al. Being the first major publication that kind of looked at it, where they were saying not only are we getting the anti-reflux properties, but we're getting the better drug delivery, more of the lipidal, more of the chemoembolic is ending up in the tumor, and less is ending up in the normal liver. And so that was kind of the start of balloon occlusion TACE, which then eventually came to Europe and then the US and morphed into, how can we make this better than using these balloon catheters? And a company was started around that time looking at microvalves that you could deploy and take down. And the first microvalve instead of a balloon was the Surefire catheter. And that went through a number of iterations over the early 2010s through 2020 before it eventually was converted into the TriNav catheter, what it is today. The early devices were kind of a struggle to use, where you had to use a proprietary catheter that was really good at dissecting the celiac artery and spasming, and it really had its limitations. And luckily, engineering has improved significantly since then, and a lot of those issues have been mitigated. And now it's a much more easy-to-use device, but you still get the benefits of this kind of pressure-enabled drug delivery, which, as I'm sure we'll talk about, is not only increasing pressure, which is what we thought it was, but it's also the decreasing of pressure as well.
But specifically, and you mentioned it, talk about like the microvalve. Will you like put a little bit more color on that? Like exactly like what's happening like at the action portion of the catheter to give it like the characteristics that make it like kind of a different catheter. They're different than an in-hole, right?
Perfect. So let's start with the closest comparator and kind of first principles, right? So when you think about reducing pressure, stopping pressure, anti-reflux, the thing that most people think about is a balloon, right? So you have a balloon microcatheter, and there's a whole bunch of different flavors of them on the market. You can imagine putting that into an artery, inflating it, you get the nice balloon shape where you're getting occlusion of the entire artery, and hypothetically flow becomes completely static at that point, right? There's no inflow coming into the artery. Now that's a little bit of a misnomer because there is still the vasovasorum, and you still do get some antegrade flow, but it really is as close to full stasis as you can imagine. The microvalve takes on that concept where you can, prevent the arterial flow, but you can actually change that dynamically. So in the current generations of the devices, the microvalve is up during diastole and constricts or collapses partially during systole, sorry. So as the blood pressure is going forward, you have collapse. As there's no flow going forward, you have expansion. That collapse and expansion allows for some flow to continue to go forward throughout your entire embolic. Unlike complete stasis, you still do have some antegrade flow.
Okay, so to recap, flow during systole, quote unquote stagnant during diastole. So if you're delivering your embolic, the microvalve, like the pressure is high enough to where it can blow past the valve. And so you have nothing but like antegrade flow, but nothing should be coming backwards.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Just to touch on a little bit of like early experience with the Surefire catheter. We were talking a little bit offline for the audience, and we were both, I wouldn't say commiserating, but it's come a long way. Like it used to have that proprietary like sauce catheter, or I think they were all proprietary French catheters that were just very, very stiff. But now, can you use the catheter with any base catheter, any 5 French, 6 French catheter that you want?
For the most part, yes. Some of the larger sizes, you do actually need a larger inner diameter. And that's the whole idea, is that you needed a larger inner diameter than your traditional 038 microcatheter. But I can tell you the newer generations are significantly easier to use. They really took that feedback to heart when redesigning those base catheters. And so now they function almost identically to a normal, sauce. That's my go-to, is I use a sauce.
Okay.